For those listening today, you know the pain and anguish of losing a child. But can you try to imagine what losing a child, a spouse, and a sibling would be like? Today's guest has experienced all of this and has many insights to share. Today, I'm joined by Angie Hanson, who knows grief all too well. She has turned her pain into purpose and now dedicates her life to helping others find resilience and purpose in their own grief journeys. Welcome to the show, Angie.
Hi, thank you for having me, Lisa.
First off, I am so sorry for all of your losses. That is really so much to carry. Can you tell us a little bit about your son, Garrett?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. Yeah, my son Garrett, he was just this little sweet little boy. Garrett was 1 years old when he died. He died 6 days after his first birthday. But so I had a short time with him here on Earth, and but during that time, Garrett really just he brought life to our family. You know, it completed our little family of four, and we were just happy. We were living the life that I think most people dreamed of and wanted, and we didn't want for much, and we didn't, we just lived a perfect life. And Garrett just he was happy. My daughter Gracie, she was 3 when we had Garrett, and so she loved her baby brother. And Garrett and her just had this special little bond. And he was a little fiery little strawberry blonde reddish hair. His dad had red hair, so he kind of got that little fiery red hair, and he just had the biggest smile, the biggest blue eyes, and he loved everything balls and like footballs, baseballs, basketballs, any type of ball you could imagine. And he would like I said, since he was one when he died, he wasn't speaking a lot, but the one thing he would say was balls, balls, balls all the time. So that was one of my favorite memories is when he did turn one. One of our very good friends, they bought him a bag of balls, and that was his favorite present, was just opening that bag and having all these different balls to play with and choose from. And then his other favorite thing to say was always "uh-oh," and he always said it at the right time. It was just always "uh-oh, uh-oh," and it was like that was very perfectly timed. But he was an angel, and I'm so glad that I was picked to be his mommy for that 1 year of life here.
So sweet, so sweet. I can almost hear him saying those words, ball. Katie always used to say bus when she was little. She was a late bloomer when it came to talking, but that was one word that she would use all the time, bus. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened when he passed away?
Yes. Garrett, like I said, he had just turned one on June 21st, 2006, and he was healthy. He went to his 1 year checkup. Everything checked out completely normal. That weekend, I can't remember exactly what day his birthday was on, but it must have been like a Thursday or something like that. And then that weekend we had a family birthday party for his 1 year, and of course it was John Deere themed because we live in Nebraska, so we live in the middle of corn country, and my husband was a big John Deere person, and Garrett loved riding on the tractors too. And anyways, then that Tuesday following, which was June 27th, 2006, it was a gorgeous, sunny, beautiful, perfect day. It's always, I can still picture that day. I don't know, it's just amazing what our minds do and what you remember during such a traumatic day of your life. But I remember everything vividly to down to what I was wearing. But I worked part-time at a bank, and I took Gracie and Garrett to their daycare provider's house. And Garrett was just kind of lingering a little bit longer, hanging onto my leg. It was just one of those days, and I was just talking to the daycare provider, and everything went great. And later on that day, I received a phone call. The call that nobody ever wants to receive, but it was from the daycare provider's house. And it was not our daycare provider. It was a man, and he said he was with the sheriff's department. And he said there was an incident at the daycare provider's house, but um, he said, and your son is being life flighted to the hospital. So, panic. Everything set in super fast. To move fast forward, we arrived at the hospital and Garrett did not survive. And they originally were saying it was SIDS. And there was no, just to put a disclaimer out there, right away is nothing happened with the daycare provider. She provided excellent care. She was amazing. I can't imagine the trauma she went through finding Garrett sleeping in his crib and not breathing. And, it was, I know, a very traumatic experience for her. So, but I never, and so that was a question that I never even asked. I never even asked at the hospital, like, what happened? What happened? Like, and and it never occurred to me until actually the next day, we received a call from the sheriff's department and they said, um, they were talking about all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, wait. Why, and I guess it's very normal, obviously, if somebody dies in a home, you have to look at any causes.
Mhm.
But they were looking at her for if there was any trauma done to Garrett, and there was not. And but it broke my heart because I had never even in that instant, I never thought that that was even a possibility. And so our pediatrician called right away. And he was devastated because he had received the report. And he's like, Angie, he said, I know that SIDS can happen to kids that are 1 years or older. And he goes, I've been a pediatrician for 30 plus years. And he goes, I've never seen it happen. He goes, if, with your and your husband Jack's permission, if we can do like a more thorough, detailed autopsy on Garrett, we would like to. And we, of course, said yes. And so we did. And then we learned probably about 4 weeks later that Garrett had an undetected heart defect.
Mm.
And um, it's um, it's a very long name, but basically his right coronary artery was kinked. And there are no signs or symptoms, especially in young little kids. And sudden death happens during extreme rest or extreme activity. And Garrett obviously was napping. And yeah, and so you've heard of maybe like some teenagers just collapsing and dying on like a basketball court or different things like that. That's a similar defect that they probably carried. And so, yeah, so we had the answer of how Garrett died. But it was, then it didn't change anything, I guess. It didn't change our perspective of our grief or how we were going to move forward in life. And, but the knowledge of knowing how it was and how what happened. It really, I guess it did give me a little ease. And then it's not hereditary, but we did have our daughter Gracie tested at the time just to make sure that, so she went in and had heart, she had a heart scan and everything. And it was kind of a surreal moment because during that time they showed us what they were looking at on Gracie's like, echo that they were doing and all that. And they showed us like where it was like his artery was kinked. And so it was just very, very interesting and kind of surreal. But Gracie was completely fine. She had none of that. And it's just, it's just something that happens. I don't know.
You know, having answers, I don't know that we can put words to it, but having answers helps in a small way. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it doesn't change anything, right?
Mm-mm.
There's no point being angry at the daycare provider. There's no point in being angry at God. There's no point,
Yeah.
it's but it's one piece of the puzzle. I know we still don't have the ultimate reason. I mean, Katie died blunt force trauma in a car accident, but what led to her car leaving one side of the road, to cross over, we'll never have that. And
Yeah,
I've let that go. My husband still hangs on to that a little bit, but it's all these things, right? That's just, it's part of our story now.
exactly.
One thing that really led me to wanting to have you on the podcast was your approach to grief. And I think we share a lot of similarities in our approach to grief. But let's start by you telling our listeners about the unique way that you honor Garrett and keep his memory alive.
Well, I do many different things. In the beginning, I'll kind of start with in the beginning how we honored Garrett. It's just like how do we just make sure that no one ever forgets him, right? And because we knew no matter what it was going to look like down the road for us, we would never forget our son. But other people would, right? And that's just human nature and society that, we don't get to design that, I guess. But early on, I started making memory ornaments in memory of my son, and I'd give them to family and friends. Okay, that was something I did. Um, every year we honor Garrett on his, and I still do it today. We honor him by we used to do like those Chinese lanterns and light them, but because of fire hazards, we don't do those anymore. And then we do balloons. I'm kind of gotten away from doing balloons so much just because of, what happens with the balloons when they're gone. And then but now we honor Garrett every year by either on his birthday and his we call it angelversary. Some people just call it a death date, but we call it his angelversary. And we go out to like a restaurant that we think, oh, we kind of pick what, Garrett would be this age, what would he like? And so we do that. And then we give out money to people randomly. I made little cards for Garrett, and they have his name and a little bit of information on it. And we do random acts of kindness. We pick out random people, and we just give them money with that little card, and and
Mhm.
that has been helpful. And then, fast forward to where we are today. I've created a business it's called Butterflies and Halos, and butterflies are my sign from Garrett. Every time I see a butterfly, that is my Garrett, no matter what. And I always say hello, hi Garrett, to the butterfly. And so I do greeting cards. You know, griefy greeting cards, support cards for individuals, and then I've written a book, and I tell Garrett's story. I share a story. We have um, because Garrett died of a heart defect, and we don't. Not that an AED machine, and I don't know if your listeners are familiar, but it's an automatic electronic defibrillator, which, they come at a scene and they restart the heart. That would not have saved Garrett, but since Garrett's passing, we have placed 13 AED machines across our community in places that need them desperately. And so we would have fundraisers to raise money to place those AED machines. And so, and the biggest thing I do to honor Garrett is I talk about him every day. We talk about him. We share memories. There's not a day that doesn't go by that we don't talk about him. Now, Garrett's going to be gone. It'll be this June. He'll be gone 19 years. And it's a long time, it's crazy, but I don't feel like it's been that long. So I still feel like I can talk about him like openly, and it's it is easier now. Like I smile. I just smile every time I think of him and talk about him. The the tears are way less than they used to be. But I feel like from the beginning, we never stopped talking about them. And I think that was a huge guide in how we moved forward.
Yeah, you're right. And I think my own perspective is that this is a generational change and that you and I and our generation, we are starting to see a bit of a shift because even a generation ago, my mom and dad, my very best friend lost a brother growing up, and his name has never been said in the house since. And as part of her healing and her coping, she so desperately wanted to talk about her brother. But every time she brought it up, she was shushed, right? Shh, shh,
Yeah.
you don't talk about that. Whereas we, I think, are starting to see changes now. I mean, just the number of Facebook groups alone about grief and
Yeah.
loss
Oh,
is a
yeah.
reflection in my mind that we want and need to talk about this. So
Yeah.
I agree. Katie's a part of my world, you know, in different ways. I mean, sometimes yesterday I was working at the hospital. It's not a place where her name typically comes up. Although now that I think back, maybe I did. But but she's always right here in my heart and that day and that moment, but her life more than her death, is always front and center in my
Yeah.
world as well.
For sure. Yeah. And I love that you said how you said about the just the shift. And I just talked about this. I spoke Sunday at a church. A friend of mine asked to come speak to their adult group at church and talk about my book and my story a little bit. And it was this group and not, they're the aged group, they're their older group. And we talked about their age compared to my age. And everybody at this adult group was 65 plus.
Mhm.
And it was just really interesting because we did talk about the shift in how we grieve and what it's looking like. And because every single one of those persons in that group had said that no, we couldn't talk about it. I had a brother that died. We couldn't talk about it. I had, my dad died. No, we couldn't talk about it. And so I, my whole perception there and what I was trying to tell them as well is like, I'm 50, almost 53, but when all this happened to me, I was in my 30s, and so, um, I said, I think it started then, but now I said, I'm just seeing this shift in how the grief community is evolving. I said, we're creating a new evolution. And they were asking me, like, well, then how do we as a society or as an older generation, um, help like when someone dies, like we're losing friends that are 80s, now, or different things like that. And I even talked about, well, if they lost a child now, their child would probably be in their 50s, like my age. And they're like, how do we deal with that and honor that? And it was just a beautiful conversation. And we were able to just really talk through a lot of the pain points that they deal with as an older generation.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And that, has been my mission. I don't know, I can't pinpoint the exact time, but early on in my grief, let's say, where I started recognizing, I mean, I'm embarrassed to admit now, I have worked in a field in healthcare where I work with terminally ill patients. I mean, not all of my patients are terminal, but a chunk of them are. And I had a whole half a page of notes, when I was going through school, thought I knew a thing or two about grief until it happened to me. Um, and I feel like if I can do anything in my remaining time as a human, I would like to help make that shift, help augment that shift so that it becomes almost like mental health. I mean, I think in our generation as well, we've seen this shift. And I credit my son, like the younger generation who've made this shift. It's okay to talk about mental health. It's okay not to be okay, all of that stuff. Because I've seen a big shift in that in their generation, is that maybe we can move forward a little bit, with
Yeah.
grief. The reality is, I mean, none of this is earth shattering, but none of us are here forever. And therefore, we're all going to face grief at some point in time. You may not all lose a child. Not everybody maybe will experience, the loss of a sibling and so on and so on, but we're going to experience some loss. So let's get ourselves educated and get the tools in place so that when it does happen, maybe, we can be better equipped to handle it. So I want to
Exactly.
pivot a little bit and talk about marriage after loss. I mean, I've been quite open with my journey. After we lost Katie at about that 6, 9 month mark, if somebody would have asked me, do you guys think you're going to be okay? I would have said, no, oh no, the train is heading that way and we are not going to make it. And fast forward 9.5 years, and we are stronger and tighter, not only as a couple, but I would say the three of us have grown together. And I'm grateful for that. But I'm curious what your experience is because everybody experiences things differently.
Yes. I agree with you. I would have said at the 6 month markish after Garrett had died, I would have been like, ooh, it's just, and I talk a lot about this too because I felt like Jack and I were very good. Like, I felt like we were good. Like, Jack took on a lot of our grief, my grief and our daughter's grief. And so he carried a lot of that for us. But our intimacy level was gone. There was none of that. And without that as well, how you just start becoming these friends. And I honestly thought that Jack and I were, I mean, I didn't know how it was going to end up either, but then we got thrown a different hand in our marriage a year after Garrett had died, and Jack was diagnosed with cancer. And so I talk a lot about this, you know, because Jack had a little bout of cancer when he was 21 years old. He had melanoma in his arm. He had a spot, and he had it removed. There's nothing else that happened after that. But what I learned after Jack's diagnosis is just the stress. So what do we don't we don't do our self-care when we're grieving so heavily. And Jack took on my grief, Gracie's grief, his family's grief. I mean, I think Jack just because he wanted to be the fixer, and he wanted to do all that. So I just feel like the stress just manifested in his body and it ignited the cancer cells that had been laying dormant for so many years. And so Jack was diagnosed with cancer. In October, so a little over a year after our son's 1 year anniversary, and he was diagnosed with ocular melanoma. And it spread to his brain and his liver and his spleen. So Jack was diagnosed stage 4 terminal cancer. We didn't know what that would look like. We didn't know how long, did we have 5 years? Did we have 1 month? We didn't know. But that changed Jack and I's relationship in an instant, and it took our grief level of mourning our son, it shifted. It shifted to okay, we can't focus, and I don't know how I did this, but I shifted from I have to help my husband survive. We have a different battle. I
Hmm.
can't focus on just Garrett's death anymore. I have to fight for my husband's life and help him. And all the while we have our little daughter over here, she's 5 years old now, and like how she's been thrown this huge amount of grief and all this stuff at such a young age. And so we did everything we could to fight for Jack's life. Our marriage grew stronger and better. I mean, we really opened up and we started talking about a lot because we knew then that Jack's time was going to be limited with us, and what was my and Gracie's life going to look like going forward, and just the things that we felt and how Jack wanted us to still continue to honor Garrett and do, just all those deep personal conversations. So our marriage did grow and it did grow stronger, but I'm not, I'm not sure where we would have been had Jack not been diagnosed with cancer. Um, I feel like we were married 12 and a half years, and we had dated prior to that 5 years. So, I mean, we had been together a long time, and I would have never foreseen Jack and I ever divorcing or anything like that because we had a strong home life, and we had, it was just the death of our son that made the things difficult, right? Nothing else in our life was difficult. It was just the death of our son that made our marriage difficult. But then, like I said, when Jack was diagnosed, um, and he battled then for 16 months, and he lost his battle with his cancer on February 8th, 2009. So just about 2.5 years after our son had died. Um, and the biggest gift Jack gave me in life was just he taught me how to love strong. He taught me how to live life without him. He taught me he gave me permission to love again. He gave me so much grace during his hours of I wouldn't even call it darkness, but just his hours of, dying, he gave me all that. And so I'm forever grateful for that. And I miss today what would have been or could have been, but I also know I can't do that because I am also very happily remarried now. And I have married a man who honors Jack, who honors Garrett, and he knew Jack. He didn't know Garrett, and but he allows myself and my daughter Gracie to talk about Garrett and Jack and everybody, So I mean, I, so I don't know. I'm not a typical situation when it comes to that because I know widows and widowers, and they don't have the same experience I've had. So, and I know it's hard for some people. But you know what? I feel like I get to receive this because I've lost so much.
Isn't that true? What's that saying that you don't know love until you've lost, or something to
Yeah,
that effect? You don't know happiness unless you've known grief and all this kind of stuff too. And it's so bittersweet when you think of it in those terms. But I think that that's a perspective that we get to choose.
mm,
I think that we can very, very easily choose well, this terrible, awful, horrific thing happened to me. So yeah, there's no happiness anymore, right? And we've
right.
we've both seen that, and not to pass judgment on that. I mean, there was certainly a time in my grief journey that I felt that way, but I think that it is a choice
It
at
is.
some
Yeah.
point in time.
Yeah, and
When
I always say that about choices. I said we have choices. I mean, we have a choice whether we get up every day and
Mhm.
however that looks. If you get up from your bed and move to your couch, you're doing good things, right? It's okay to if you shower, you made a choice, because I know people that have made the wrong choices. They have chosen to not get up every day, or they have chosen to get up every day and do the bad things like drink, and their choices have consequences. And I guess when you look at it that way, like the consequence of my choices have been fruitful.
Absolutely. And to talk about your Gracie for a moment too, I think we have to remember that when there are surviving children, I have to find a better term for that because I don't love that
I
term, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But we are modeling grief behavior.
Mm.
And ultimately, our kids, I found at least my son, who was 15 at the time, even though, he was in his mad teenage years, he was kind of one eye watching me and
Sure.
his dad, like, how do we do this? Right. Um, and yeah, it would have been tempting to lose myself in a good bottle of wine here and there, but I also knew that I was modeling behavior for him. And
Mm.
I never wanted that to be something that he would say, oh, well, I guess this is the way we deal with grief, right? So I think keeping that component in the forefront, is important as well. Now, this is probably an impossible question to answer because I think if somebody asked me, I wouldn't know the answer. But Clearly, you are driven to share your message, to share Garrett, to share Jack in a way that helps other people, right? To with through grief coaching and even mentoring.
Mhm.
Was there a point in time where you thought that this might be your journey forward, or was it a very organic transformation?
It was very organic. I I guess in a sense, I would say that in the very beginning, I was going to do everything possible to keep Garrett's memory alive. I didn't know what that looked like, but I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And even then, after Jack died, I was like, okay, what are we going to do to continue to honor these boys? How are we going to do this? And I continued to do fundraisers after Jack had passed. And that's where Gracie and I would donate the AED machines. We continued all that. And it was Jack's vision and mission in the very beginning to do that, but Gracie and I continued it. So I think then there was that time period where I was just finding my footing after my losses and trying to make sure Gracie and I were living our life the best we could. And then that's when I slowly started falling in love and finding a new partner in life. And I think that's where I was given, like, that's where God was just, and I have my faith and I'm a very faithful person. But I feel like that's where God was just holding me and carrying me through those days. And I didn't during a certain period of time, I didn't have to do anything grandiose to honor my people. There was nothing. But then all of a sudden it switched. Probably 2021. And maybe it was like this desire after the whole COVID thing that so much loss was happening. Maybe that kind of just was manifesting in my mind and I didn't even realize it. But I just that's when I decided to do the greeting cards. It just kind of happened organically. And then in 2019, I actually started writing my book. But then I had told myself, no, you can't do it, Angie. Like, who's going to read a story about all your losses? It's going to be awful. I was just doing that. And then my husband, Chance, was like, Angie, you can do this. He's like, you need to do this. So he was driving me and pushing me to do these things. And even my daughter, Gracie, she's almost 23 now, but she was like, Mom, you can do this. You can do this. Write it. And so I just did it, but I think it just happened. Yeah, it just kind of all happened organically. I don't know.
I think, my belief is that what is meant for us keeps showing up for us,
Hmm.
right? And we can ignore it. We can put it on the side shelf over there for a while, but it keeps showing up. And, it's God, the universe, whatever you want to believe, is
Yeah.
saying, okay, this is meant for you. You need to do
Yeah.
this. I remember my writing coach when I wrote my book. I had the same thoughts as you. I mean, who wants to read a sad book about this kid dying?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Would you write this book if it could help one person?" Yep.
Yeah.
Then you need to write the book, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always kind of teased too because I was never a writer. I mean,
Me neither.
I journaled a ton after Garrett died. That was kind of my healing um in the nights when I couldn't sleep, when I was crying and the tears were falling. I'd get up and I'd journal until my tears stopped. And then, I'd be exhausted. I'd be like, okay, I can go to sleep now. And but yeah, I after I wrote my book too, some of my English teachers from high school, they were like, Angie, we would have never thought this out of you. I'm like, me neither.
Funny, hey?
Yeah.
So interesting. I know I joke too. I say, if you would have asked me 10 years before I wrote my book, would I ever write a book? I would have laughed and said, I had a greater chance of scaling Mount Everest than writing a book.
Exactly.
But here we are.
Uh-huh. Exactly.
So I want to tap into your coaching brain for a moment. You are a grief coach. And clearly you are walking this path of loss and grief as well. I think a lot of parents that I talk to, either through the podcast or in my own mentoring business, they're always looking for practical ways that we can start to rebuild our lives, right? I think those first few steps are what give us confidence. They're what gives us hope. And then we can keep going. But like, where do people start?
I tell a lot of people, the simple things are just honestly for me honoring. I always tell people to honor your people and honor your heart. Because that is kind of a starting point because if you are not honoring your person and if you're not honoring your own heart and where it's at, that's they're not going to be able to take that next step forward, and then I really just give them practical tips. And I mean, I'm sure many of us have heard these, and they may sound like everyone says that, but it really is transformative. I meet everybody where they're at for myself, as a coach, even as a friend or a mentor, I meet people where they're at. So if they're past like the deep, deep grief and they're kind of in the middle stage of like, okay, I don't feel like I feel like I can get out of bed every day and I can do the things. So now what, And I really, journaling, like I said before, journaling is huge. And I love the practice of journaling, whether it's, writing down one sentence or, finding a verse or a quote and just dive deep into that. Dive deep into that. And what does that mean for you? And, talk to me about it then. Let me know how that affected you because um, there's so much healing. And I don't know if you found this or if you journaled after your daughter had died, but I would look back 6 months after and look at my journal entries, and they were dark and ugly in the very beginning, very dark and ugly. And I saw this progression, I saw this healing. And I was like, I didn't feel that healing in my body, but reading my words, I was healing. And I always share that with people that I'm mentoring or coaching just because I don't want them to just think, oh, here's another person telling me to journal, right? There is power in journaling. And then we talk about self-care. What does self-care look like? I really approach that with, breathing exercises, getting outside, in nature. No matter, I mean, even when it's cold, if you can stand outside for a couple minutes and breathe in that fresh, cold air, I mean, it clears everything in our body, right? And then just finding little tasks that you can do. No, you don't have to go write a book. Um, do you have to do major things? No, but how can you honor your person moving forward? And I just feel like tapping into their inner self, that's where I have to start with them, like I said, and just and then it's kind of just seamlessly flows, I feel like, in coaching.
You're right. I firmly believe that there are some basics and self-care. I mean, I was a health and wellness coach before Katie died. That was ingrained into even who I am today. It's my antidepressant. It's what keeps me, sleeping, which is still a struggle, but it's the first place, and even when I was writing my book, I have a chapter in there just about self-care. And I'm a science girl, so I dove into the science of, how does self-care actually help? And one piece of information that I share over and over again, because I think it's so fascinating, is, we forget that the tears that we cry, which in the beginning is very there's a lot.
Yes.
That's water, right? And we have to replace those tears because even when we're a teensy tiny little bit dehydrated, we are way more prone to be thrown into a deep depressive state, anxiety and all this thing. So it essentially exacerbates our grief and that alone. So, if you can have your 6 to 8 cups of water a day, you're helping yourself so much. So I do think that's a cornerstone. And I did journal as well. And like you, I look back at my very, very, very first journal, and like some entries were either like angry scribbles that went through pages and pages because I couldn't even write, so mad. And the next entry might be 3 words because that's all I had in me that day. But to see that progression, you
Hmm.
know, um, there is something very healing about putting a pen to paper.
There really is. Yeah,
100%.
I also saw when I would look back on my journals, sometimes there was this middle part, probably within that 6 months of after losing Garrett, um, where I was so angry, but then I was writing letters to Garrett. Like my voice
Mhm.
was talking to Garrett, like, I miss you, Garrett. I love you, Garrett. Like, this is what we did today. Like I was telling him our life, and then that I was like, wow, I didn't even realize I was doing that, I don't think, because then it changed. Then I was starting to journal about my feelings. So it's such an evolution to, like you said, putting the pen to paper. And, in some of my beginning journals, the pages are warped, so those must be tears, those are the dried tears. And because you go further on and the pages are fine. So that's I find that kind of just so beautiful in a just a very healing way.
Journaling to me was a safe place as well. I mean, it's no secret to anybody listening. We had a lot of struggles with our then 15-year-old son. Um, and journaling was safe because I could yell and scream at him on paper,
Mhm.
and those words would never tear our relationship apart. It was a place for me to dump, unload, or sometimes my husband, but because you can't take back those words when we say them out loud. And I know that I still did that in some ways, but it was a safe place for me to just really get rid of some of that stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful, so grateful that I found that tool.
Yeah. That is wonderful.
So we're kind of going down this road anyway. I want to pick your brain a little bit about the whole idea around beliefs, thoughts, mindset, perspective. Everybody has a different word for it. How do you think that plays into our grief journey?
Oh, I think it's huge. Like I talked about choices, we talked about choices. I had, like I said, a strong faith, and I had a strong belief that there was something greater. We were not huge church people prior to Garrett dying. I believed, and I studied the word, but I we didn't go to church all the time. But even I never, I don't feel like I ever lost hope after Garrett died. I don't feel like I lost the hope because I felt a huge presence. Now, after Jack died and then my brother, which we haven't really t touched base much about, but I did lose a lot of faith. I was mad at God, so um but when Jack was sick and dying, I never gave up hope. It just changed, like when he was on hospice, we knew Jack was going to die. My hope now was not a cure. My hope was that Jack was going to be pain free and he was going to be reunited with our son. And I mean, that was my last words to Jack, where I leaned down to him. I said, "It's okay. You can stop protecting us and being here for us." I said, "Go be with Garrett." And Jack died shortly after that. And I think he was holding on to thinking he had to be the strong one. So I honestly believe in, we are, we are being held by something. And whatever you believe in, whatever your belief is, there's something that's carrying. I'll talk to my for myself. There's something that carried me through all these losses. There has to be something bigger than me. I am a strong person, but I had to have something to carry me through it. And but it goes in line with the choices. So I had to make that choice to believe, and by making that choice, I saw the change in me, because I talk about the 3 C's: choices, chances, and changes. And um I had the choice. I made the choice to find love again, for example. And what that did was it changed me. It changed my vision of life and different things. And So it's very important to me. I just feel like there's something higher than all of us, and I think we have to kind of find that and lean into it however you can, whatever you believe in, and whatever your spiritual guidance is. I just feel like, and if you feel like your child is your guide, then, lean into that and talk to them. I mean, because if we don't believe in that, I mean, what is there, That's my belief.
Absolutely. I've felt this way my whole life, but I I feel like this is like a big old university, this thing called life, and we are here to learn. And unfortunately, the learning comes through the hard stuff. It doesn't come through the Hawaiian beach holidays. It doesn't come through, when everything is going well. Unfortunately, we're here to learn, and there is so much more. There has to be so
Mhm.
much more to life than what our little mortal brains believe there is just here in this one lifetime.
I
And we
believe
haven't
that.
we haven't even gotten to your books yet. Um, and I want to honor your time here today, but tell us a little bit about your memoir, which is called Chapters of a Resilient Heart. And you've also co-authored Resilient AF, love the title, Stories of Resilience, Volume 2. Tell us a little bit about those, how they came to be.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I started writing my memoir in 2019. And it grew from my journaling. And then when Jack was sick, we had a Caring Bridge page. And that, for people that don't know what that is, it's a page where you can create, and then you can write everything you want out there. So you don't have to constantly be calling people, texting people. This was in 2007 when Jack was diagnosed. So, like, social media platforms, it wasn't a huge thing, right? So you didn't have all that. People weren't even doing a ton of texting and stuff back then. It was so different. But Carrying Bridge was there and then. So we could go on there and journal and write. Jack could write his feelings, how his appointments were going, his journey. And so as I started to get back into the writing, I decided I wanted to honor my people. So I wrote about Garrett's life, I wrote about Jack's life, and I wrote about my brother's life. And then I brought the people into who they were. I wanted you to fall in love with them as much as I love them, how we love them. And then I talked about their deaths. I went into the raw, deep details, but I wanted you to know what type of people these were and why this was such a huge impact. And then I talk about, in each chapter, I talk about how we survived and how we honor them. And Gracie wrote a chapter in there. And so it's beautiful. Her feelings of how she navigated loss. She was 4 when her brother died. Then she was 5 when her daddy died, or 6, I should say. And then it was just and then I talk about resilience, I talk about faith, I talk about hope, I talk about remarrying and dating and how we survive the holidays. So my book is definitely not a self-help book, but it's there's a lot of ways to honor and help yourself if you read it. It's how I did it, but I know that it has helped people. So it's just a beautiful guide of remembrance for everybody and how we can honor our people.
What a
And then,
beautiful way.
yeah, and then it's just, and I talk about, how we've lost other people along the way too. Just, honoring their little stories and how we move forward in life, because then it goes back to the choices, I guess, because Jack's sister had passed away in 2018. So about 9 years after Jack had died. And I talk about it in the book because she was one of those that made the wrong choices, and she died from alcoholism. And so, that left Jack's parents, my in-laws, without any surviving children. And so That has been a huge obstacle, in our life, navigating that. But I do talk about that in my book, and I love my sister-in-law, and I just wish she knew that she had a choice of how to deal with her grief. And that is one of my biggest reasons too, is like, how do we let people know you can do this, you can survive, loss is hard, grief is hard, death is hard, losing your child is hard, losing your sibling is hard, losing a parent, everybody, a widow. But so my book, yes, is just chapters of all my losses. And, I've had several. And then this Resilient AF came from the Global Resilience Project. And um, Blair did a phenomenal job of letting us all tell our stories of resilience. And it's not a story of who my people are, although they are mentioned, but it's my story of resilience, and they are my story. So I do get to share a little bit about them, but it's not that you know, deep, heavy chapter. So that was fun, very fun, and I really enjoy. Now I've really gotten into writing, and I love writing, and I'm actually doing two more anthologies. I'm in the process of writing two more chapters and books, and they're both coming out like back to back. One's coming out like April 26th, and it's the stories of, and it's going to be the story. I'm really focusing on Jack as a widow, because Trueness did not have he didn't have anybody that was writing about a widow. And then the other one is actually it's through Hope Books, which is a faith-based writing. And this one is all about my spiritual journey, and my faith and my resilience. And so this one is kind of way different. I don't even really talk about my story in this one. I talk about the hard times and what led me to find my faith and resilience. So yeah, I've been loving writing.
As I said before, I think what is meant for us keeps showing up for us. So good for you. Good for
Yeah.
you. I can't wait to see what the future brings for you. Now, just real quick, I'd love you to share one step that a grieving parent can take today to help themselves.
I would say I would just tell them that it's okay to ask for help. However that looks for you. If you have younger children or older children, ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's where we kind of get stuck, and we don't ask for the help or the guidance or anything. And we just kind of shut down, and we think we're bothersome, and you're not bothering anybody. But um, I feel like that's a lot of the things that people say to me is like, well, I don't want to bother people, so I don't ask for help. And you have to ask for help. And I think as a parent, if you've lost your child, asking someone just to take something off of your plate is going to just help you get through that next day or the next day. And I really think we have to surrender some of that guilt of being a burden.
Absolutely. I always circle back, and I know it's the opposite, but they always say it takes a village to raise a child. But I think when we reflect back, it also takes a village to support a parent who's lost a child,
Yes, I
right? And
agree.
everyone wants to help so bad. We just have to give them a tiny bit of guidance.
I agree.
So, last but not least, can you give the listeners one place to go to find out more information about you and the work that you do?
Yes, I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram at Butterflies and Halos, and that's my website as well, butterfliesandhalos.com.
Awesome. So, go and check out Angie's books and everything that she does and all her cards. They're beautiful.
Thank
Angie,
you.
thank you so much for being here today. We could talk so much longer, but today we'll wrap it up with that. Thank you for sharing your son with us and your husband, and I really appreciate all your wisdom.
Well, thank you for having me, Lisa.
All right, and to our listeners, take care, and we'll catch you next time.